Lucas sat at his desk, gazing at the framed photo of his wife, Emily. It had been taken a few years ago during a rare carefree moment on vacation. In the picture, Emily's laughter was vibrant, her eyes full of life. Yet lately, something about those eyes seemed distant, dulled by secrets he couldn't quite put his finger on. The changes had been gradual, subtle enough to ignore at first. Emily started working late more often, brushing off his questions with vague excuses. "The marketing campaign's a nightmare," she'd say, or, "John needs all hands on deck this week." Her phone became her constant companion, always within reach, and she guarded it like a hawk. Lucas told himself he was imagining things, that everyone goes through rough patches, but that gnawing unease persisted. One night, after Emily had come home late smelling of expensive cologne that wasn't his, Lucas decided he couldn't ignore the signs anymore. His instincts whispered the truth, but he needed proof before he confronted her. Instead of exploding with accusations, Lucas chose another path, one that would take him down a darker road than he could have anticipated. The next day, while Emily was out, he installed a series of hidden cameras and microphones around their house. Every room except the bathroom and their son Tyler's room was wired. The technology was discreet, invisible to anyone not actively searching for it. Lucas felt a pang of guilt as he worked, but he silenced it with a single thought: I deserve to know the truth. At first, the surveillance turned up nothing. He watched hours of footage in the evenings after Emily went to sleep. Most of it was mundane: Emily cooking dinner, tidying the living room, answering emails. Yet there were small, fleeting moments that kept Lucas on edge. Sometimes she'd stare off into the distance, as if contemplating something heavy. Other times she'd check her phone with a smile that never reached her eyes. One night, Lucas was scrolling through footage when he noticed something peculiar. The camera in their bedroom had recorded Emily pacing back and forth on a phone call. She spoke in hushed tones, her body language tense. "He can't know," she whispered. "We'll have to wait." "No, I'll handle it. Trust me." Lucas rewound the clip, listening again and again. The conversation was short, cryptic, but unmistakably suspicious. His mind raced with possibilities. Who was she talking to? What couldn't he know? It felt like pieces of a puzzle were scattering around him, just out of reach. Over the next few days, things became stranger. Objects in the house were subtly moved when Lucas wasn't home. Photo frames slightly tilted, a drawer he rarely used left ajar. At first, he dismissed it as Emily or Tyler being careless, but the incidents kept piling up. Then came the notes. The first one was stuck to the refrigerator. It was handwritten on a scrap of paper: "You're not as clever as you think." Lucas froze when he saw it. His eyes darted around the room, as if the walls themselves were watching him. He tore the note down and checked the cameras, but there was no footage of anyone placing it there. It was as though it had materialized from thin air. That night sleep eluded him. He lay in bed beside Emily, her soft breathing a stark contrast to the storm raging in his mind. He wondered if the note was a prank, but it didn't feel like one. Someone knew about the cameras. Worse still, they wanted him to know they knew. Lucas's paranoia deepened. He began analyzing every interaction with Emily, looking for cracks in her facade. He noticed how her responses seemed too rehearsed, how she would subtly steer conversations away from anything that might reveal too much. Was she toying with him? Or was someone else pulling the strings? His mind spiraled further when another note appeared, this time on his office desk. "Are you sure you want the truth?" Lucas clenched his jaw, crumpling the paper in his fist. Whatever game this was, he wasn't backing down. He would uncover the truth, even if it destroyed him. Lucas's obsession deepened as days turned into weeks. He watched footage endlessly, his eyes scanning every detail with an almost manic intensity. He barely slept, often falling asleep at his desk surrounded by screens. The cameras fed him hours of video, but every clue seemed shrouded in ambiguity, each new revelation leading to more questions. Emily's behavior remained a maddening paradox. She would come home late with carefully rehearsed excuses, yet there were moments where she seemed genuinely affectionate, kissing him on the cheek, asking about his day. Is she really capable of living two lives like this? Lucas wondered. One night, as Lucas sifted through the latest footage, something jolted him upright. The camera in the living room had captured Emily entering the house, her phone to her ear. "I'm home. He's in the garage," she whispered before hanging up. There was no further explanation, but it chilled Lucas to his core. Who had she been talking to? His paranoia reached new heights when he started noticing other eerie events. He would leave his office briefly and return to find his laptop slightly shifted, or a document he hadn't opened displayed on the screen. It wasn't just the notes anymore, someone was watching him. The next incident shattered what little remained of Lucas's peace of mind. One evening, after Emily had gone to bed, Lucas reviewed footage from earlier in the day. As he fast-forwarded through the dining room camera feed, he suddenly stopped. There, at 3:37 p.m., Emily stood facing the camera, staring directly at it. It wasn't the casual glance of someone passing by. She locked eyes with the lens as though she knew it was there. Slowly, she tilted her head, a faint smile playing on her lips. It wasn't friendly. It wasn't reassuring. It was a look filled with unsettling amusement. Lucas's heart pounded. He rewound the footage, hoping he'd imagined it. But there she was again, staring, through the camera through him. He shut his laptop, feeling as if he'd been caught in some invisible trap. Had she known about the cameras from the beginning? The following morning, Lucas's mind raced with theories. Maybe Emily had discovered the surveillance after he installed it, or perhaps she'd known even longer. He tried to recall her exact movements when he'd put up the equipment but came up blank. His thoughts spiraled further. What if she had been planting breadcrumbs, manipulating me from the start? Tyler, their son, noticed the tension too. Over breakfast, he asked, "Dad, are you and Mom fighting?" Lucas shook his head, forcing a smile. "No, buddy. Everything's fine." But the boy wasn't convinced. Neither was Lucas. At work, Lucas could barely function. His colleagues commented on his haggard appearance, but he brushed them off with vague mentions of stress. His mind was consumed by the surveillance. He felt trapped in a maze of secrets and half-truths. That night, a new note appeared, this time on the bathroom mirror. Written in red marker, it read, "Smile. You're on camera." Lucas's vision blurred with rage and fear. He ripped the note down and stormed into the living room, where Emily was watching TV. She looked up, concerned by his sudden entrance. "What's wrong?" she asked. For a moment, Lucas debated confronting her right then and there. But he hesitated. He didn't know what she knew, and he wasn't ready to tip his hand. Instead, he muttered something about work stress and retreated to his office, locking the door behind him. The camera footage from earlier offered no answers. The cameras hadn't recorded anyone placing the note, just like before. The message was clear, though: someone was in control, and it wasn't him. As Lucas stared at the blank screens, an unsettling realization crept over him. This wasn't just about Emily's affair anymore. He had stumbled into something darker, something that twisted reality itself. The lines between paranoia and truth blurred until they became indistinguishable. Lucas felt like a man drowning in shadows, grasping for anything solid. But the more he searched, the more the shadows seemed to close in around him. And deep down, he knew that whoever was watching him had only just begun. Lucas spent the entire next day in a haze. His thoughts swirled like a storm, fragmented by fear and exhaustion. Whoever had typed that message on the camera feed was no ordinary intruder. This was personal, targeted. Someone was pulling strings from the shadows, and Lucas was dancing on the edge of their trap. Emily acted as if nothing was wrong, going about her day with eerie normalcy. Lucas studied her closely, hoping to catch some sign that she was in on it, that she was the one behind the mind games. But if she knew anything, she was a master at hiding it. Her smile was calm, her voice light, her demeanor maddeningly casual. That evening, Tyler wanted to watch a movie. Lucas tried to lose himself in the simplicity of family time, but even as he sat on the couch with his son, his mind wouldn't stop racing. He kept glancing toward the window, half expecting to see a figure standing in the shadows, watching. His paranoia had begun to infect every corner of his life. At work, he found himself distracted during meetings, jumping at every sudden noise. His boss asked him if everything was okay, and Lucas lied through his teeth, saying he was just tired. He couldn't tell anyone the truth. How would it sound? Hey, my wife might be cheating on me, and someone is playing psychological warfare in my own house. The next night, Lucas took drastic action. He hacked into the camera system to manually control the feeds, scanning every room of the house in real time. He stayed up until dawn, watching for any signs of movement. But the hours dragged on in oppressive silence. He began to wonder if whoever was tormenting him had finally stopped. Maybe the game was over. Then, at 3:12 a.m., he saw it. The camera feed from the hallway outside his bedroom flickered. A shadow moved across the frame, not just any shadow. It was tall, humanoid in shape but distorted, as though seen through warped glass. It moved unnaturally, almost gliding rather than walking. Lucas's breath caught in his throat. He leaned closer to the screen, his pulse hammering in his ears. The figure paused outside the door for a long moment, then vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. Lucas scrambled to rewind the footage, his hands shaking. But when he played it back, the figure wasn't there. The camera had recorded nothing. The only evidence was what he had witnessed with his own eyes. "What the hell is happening?" he muttered under his breath, sweat trickling down his back. Was his mind cracking under the pressure, or was something truly supernatural at play? The next morning, Lucas was exhausted and jumpy, barely holding it together. At breakfast, Emily commented on his appearance. "Lucas, you look awful. You need sleep. You've been working too hard." "Yeah, I've just had a lot on my mind," he replied tersely. Emily gave him a concerned look but didn't push the matter. Tyler, oblivious to the tension between his parents, prattled on about a school project. Lucas forced himself to engage, smiling where appropriate, nodding at the right moments. But inside, he felt like he was unraveling. Later that day, Lucas received a call from an old friend, Darren, who worked in cybersecurity. Darren was someone Lucas hadn't spoken to in years but trusted implicitly. After a brief catch-up, Lucas cautiously brought up the strange incidents with the cameras. "Let's say hypothetically," Lucas began, "that someone could access a home surveillance system remotely without leaving any trace. How would they do it?" Darren paused before answering. "It's possible if someone had physical access to your system or if your network was compromised. But if you're asking about footage being tampered with in real time, that's next-level hacking. Are you saying this is happening to you?" "Just curious," Lucas lied. He didn't want to sound paranoid, though he knew he already did. "Thanks for the info." After hanging up, Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that no amount of security upgrades would protect him. His opponent wasn't just technologically savvy, they were a ghost in his life, erasing evidence, manipulating reality itself. It was as if someone wanted to drive him insane one step at a time. That night he didn't sleep. The house was dark and silent, but Lucas remained hyper-aware of every creak and groan in the walls. Hours passed in agonizing stillness. He wandered the house like a restless spirit, checking locks and camera feeds, waiting for something, anything, to happen. At 2:47 a.m., he found another note on the dining room table. This one was different. Instead of cryptic taunts, it contained a single, chilling line. "You already know the truth." Lucas stared at the note for what felt like an eternity. The words echoed in his mind, each syllable a sledgehammer against his crumbling sanity. Did he know the truth? Was it hidden somewhere in the surveillance footage, in the hours of cryptic conversations and strange occurrences? Or was the truth something he'd been avoiding all along? He crumpled the note and hurled it across the room. His breathing was ragged, his vision blurring with fury and fear. The walls seemed to close in on him, the house itself mocking his helplessness. Lucas clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms. "No more games?" he whispered, his voice shaking. I'm going to find out who's behind this, and I'm going to end it. But deep down, he wasn't sure if he was still fighting a person, or his own mind. Lucas was slipping into a state of constant fear. He couldn't tell what was real anymore. The hallucination, or whatever that figure in the hallway had been, still haunted him. Sleep was a fleeting luxury he could no longer afford. His world narrowed to two things: watching and waiting. Every evening, he told himself this would be the night he found the truth. He set up his workstation with meticulous precision, triple-checking the cameras and motion sensors. Yet each time he thought he was close to uncovering something, the evidence would vanish or contradict itself. He began keeping a journal of the strange events. His entries were messy, his handwriting jagged and uneven. Note on fridge. No recording. 3:12 a.m. shadow in hallway. Disappeared on replay. Phone static at 4:45 p.m. Emily smiled as if she knew. In quieter moments, Lucas wondered if he was unraveling. Had he become so obsessed with finding proof of Emily's betrayal that he'd lost all grip on reality? He couldn't trust the cameras. He couldn't trust the house. And worst of all, he couldn't trust himself. It was during one of these restless nights that he decided to confront his fears head-on. He'd catch whoever, or whatever, was tormenting him. He stayed up, armed with a flashlight and a crowbar, ready to spring into action at the first sign of intrusion. The hours dragged by, each second stretching like taffy. His mind played tricks on him: phantom footsteps, the distant sound of laughter, shadows that shifted when he wasn't looking. Lucas told himself it was exhaustion. You're not crazy. You just need sleep. At 2:30 a.m., the living room camera feed glitched for a moment. Lucas froze, his eyes locked on the screen. When the image returned, he saw the figure again. This time, it stood near the front door, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. The figure didn't move, didn't make a sound. It simply watched. Heart pounding, Lucas grabbed his flashlight and bolted from the office. His footsteps echoed loudly as he hurried down the stairs, the beam of light slicing through the darkness. He reached the front door and swung the flashlight around, searching for any sign of the intruder. Nothing. The room was empty. No figure. No trace that anyone had been there. He checked the door. It was locked, deadbolt still in place. Slowly, he exhaled, his shoulders sagging. Maybe he had imagined it. Maybe this was his mind finally breaking under the weight of paranoia. But when he returned to the office, he found the camera feed frozen on the last image, the figure still standing by the door, watching him. Beneath it, a new message appeared, typed in bold letters. You'll never escape. Lucas slammed the laptop shut, panic clawing at his throat. He paced the room, his thoughts spiraling. This wasn't just paranoia. Someone, or something, was actively breaking him down. The following morning, Lucas decided to take action. He couldn't survive like this much longer. He called Darren again, this time with more urgency. I need help, he admitted. I think someone's hacked my system. It's serious. Darren agreed to come over the next day. The thought of backup gave Lucas a glimmer of hope, though it was faint. He had a hard time believing anyone could stop whatever was happening. Later that day, Emily approached him as he sat in the kitchen, nursing a cup of cold coffee. Are you okay, Lucas? She asked softly. You've been distant. You're not sleeping. I'm worried about you. Lucas studied her face, searching for deception. Was this genuine concern, or just another layer of the game she was playing? He wanted to scream at her, to demand the truth. But he didn't. He couldn't. The time wasn't right. I'm fine, he said curtly. Just stressed from work. She didn't seem convinced but didn't press further. Maybe you should take a break. Go out with Tyler. You've barely spent time with him. Lucas nodded absent-mindedly, though the suggestion made him feel like a failure. His son had noticed his absence, even though Lucas was physically present. The surveillance, the paranoia, it consumed him to the point where he had nothing left to give. That evening, Lucas took Emily's advice. He and Tyler went for ice cream, a rare moment of normalcy. As they sat on a park bench, Tyler talked excitedly about school and his new friends. Lucas smiled, trying to focus on the present. But the shadow of fear still loomed over him. Every person who passed by seemed like a potential threat. Every rustling leaf sounded like a whisper of warning. "Are you and Mom okay?" Tyler asked suddenly, breaking the momentary peace. Lucas blinked. "What do you mean? You've been different. You're always tired. And sometimes I hear you and Mom arguing. Are you gonna get a divorce?" The question hit Lucas like a punch to the gut. "No, buddy. We're not getting divorced," he said quickly. "We just have a lot going on right now. But I promise things will get better." Tyler nodded, though he didn't seem entirely reassured. Lucas reached out and ruffled his hair. He hated that his paranoia had affected his son. It was one more thing the unseen tormentor had stolen from him. When they returned home, Lucas tucked Tyler into bed and sat by his side until he fell asleep. In that quiet moment, he resolved to end this nightmare. No more waiting. No more paranoia. Whoever was playing this game, Emily, a stranger, or some unseen force, Lucas was going to find them and put a stop to it. But deep in his heart, he wondered, what if I've already lost? Darren arrived the next afternoon, armed with a laptop, diagnostic tools, and a skeptical but concerned look on his face. He and Lucas hadn't seen each other in years, but Darren could tell immediately that something was wrong. Lucas looked haggard, as though he hadn't slept in weeks. His hands shook as he poured them both coffee. "So," Darren began, glancing around the house, "you think someone's hacked your system and, is messing with your head?" Lucas nodded grimly. "It's not just that. They're leaving notes, manipulating the cameras, showing me things that shouldn't be possible." Darren raised an eyebrow but didn't dismiss Lucas's concerns. "Okay. Let's take a look at your setup. I'll run a full security sweep." They spent the next several hours in Lucas's office. Darren examined the camera network, ran malware scans, and checked for any external breaches. At first, everything seemed normal, no suspicious activity logs, no evidence of remote access. But then Darren paused, his brow furrowing. "Hang on," he muttered, typing rapidly. "There's an encrypted connection here. It's buried deep in your router's firmware. Someone's piggybacking on your network without triggering standard alerts." Lucas leaned forward, his pulse quickening. "Can you trace it?" "I can try," Darren replied, narrowing his eyes at the screen. "But whoever did this knows their stuff. They've masked their location." As Darren worked, Lucas paced the room, anxiety gnawing at him. The idea that someone had infiltrated their home, his sanctuary, was both infuriating and terrifying. Every shadow seemed sinister, every noise a potential threat. He half expected another note to appear before their eyes. "Got something," Darren finally said, his voice tense. He pointed to a line of code on the screen. "This script is designed to hijack your camera feeds and send data to an external server. But here's the weird part, it's only partially active. It's like, whoever set this up wanted you to know they were here but didn't want full control." Lucas clenched his fists. "They've been toying with me this whole time. Watching me. Leaving messages." Darren sighed. "I'll do what I can to lock them out, but Lucas, this is beyond your average hacker. Whoever's doing this is highly skilled. Are you sure there's no one in your life who would have a reason to mess with you like this?" Lucas hesitated. He thought of Emily, her cryptic phone calls, her knowing smiles. Was she involved? If so, why? And if not her, then who? His mind spun with possibilities, none of them comforting. "I don't know," he admitted. "But I'm going to find out." Once Darren finished securing the network, he gave Lucas a few recommendations on additional safeguards. "Call me if anything else happens," he said as he packed up his gear. "And Lucas, maybe talk to someone. A professional. This kind of stress can mess with your head." Lucas nodded absently, though he had no intention of seeing a therapist. He didn't need someone to tell him he was paranoid. He needed answers, and he was determined to get them. That night, Lucas felt a small surge of confidence. The cameras were back under his control, and Darren had installed extra layers of protection. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to hope that the nightmare might be ending. Emily was in the kitchen, tidying up after dinner. Lucas watched her from the doorway, his eyes narrowing. He debated confronting her, but once again, the timing didn't feel right. He needed more information. Instead, he joined her, offering to help with the dishes. As they worked side by side, Lucas noticed how calm and composed Emily seemed. Either she was a master manipulator, or she genuinely had no idea what was happening. "You've been quiet today," she said, glancing at him. "Is something wrong?" "Just tired," he replied, his voice carefully neutral. "Work's been rough." She nodded, accepting the excuse without question. But Lucas couldn't shake the feeling that she was studying him, assessing his every word and gesture. It was a subtle dance of suspicion and pretense, each of them hiding their true thoughts behind a mask of normalcy. After Tyler went to bed, Lucas returned to his office. He stared at the camera feeds, half expecting something to go wrong. But everything was still. The house felt unnervingly quiet, as if holding its breath. At 1:17 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. The message was short and chilling. "You can't stop what's coming." Lucas's stomach dropped. He checked the cameras again, his heart racing. In the living room feed, he saw something that made his blood run cold. A figure, tall and shrouded in darkness, stood near the window. It didn't move. It just stood there, staring at the camera. Lucas grabbed the crowbar he kept by his desk and sprinted down the stairs. He burst into the living room, flashlight in hand, ready to confront the intruder. But the room was empty. The window was locked, the curtains undisturbed. Lucas's breathing was ragged as he swept the area. There was no sign that anyone had been there. Yet he knew what he'd seen. He returned to his office, trembling with fury and fear. The camera feed was clear now. No figure. No glitch. Another message appeared on his phone: "We're closer than you think." Lucas sank into his chair, his mind unraveling further. Whoever was doing this wasn't just hacking his system. They were inside his life, manipulating his perception of reality. He clenched his jaw, his resolve hardening. "You want to play games?" he muttered to the empty room. "Let's see who breaks first." The next few days blurred together in a haze of paranoia and sleeplessness. Lucas's reality fractured further with each passing hour. The figure in the living room window, the threatening messages, each incident chipped away at his sense of control. He felt like a marionette, yanked around by invisible strings. Darren's security upgrades seemed to hold. There were no further breaches in the system. No more notes appeared. The cameras worked without a glitch. Yet the stillness was unnerving in its own right, as though whoever was tormenting him had temporarily withdrawn to lull him into complacency. But Lucas wasn't going to be fooled. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was building, something much worse than before. One afternoon, while Emily was out, Lucas decided to search her belongings. He knew it was a breach of trust, but at this point, trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. He started with her wardrobe, rifling through drawers and neatly folded clothes. He found nothing unusual, no secret phones, no incriminating documents. Then he moved to her nightstand. Inside, he found a small locked box. His hands trembled as he picked it up, the weight of his suspicions growing heavier. He searched for the key and finally found it tucked in the back of a drawer. With a soft click, the box opened. Inside were a few personal items: a necklace he had given her years ago, a collection of old letters, and a set of photographs. Lucas's breath caught as he sifted through the photos. They showed Emily with another man, her business partner, Jared. In one, they were laughing together at a restaurant. In another, they were standing too close, their faces inches apart. Lucas clenched his jaw. It wasn't definitive proof of an affair, but the intimacy in the photos was undeniable. Memories of Emily's late nights at work, her cryptic phone conversations, and her evasive behavior flashed through his mind like a dam breaking. She had lied to him, about Jared, about her whereabouts, about everything. He shoved the box back into the drawer and sat on the edge of the bed, his thoughts spinning. Was Jared involved in the psychological games as well? Were the messages and the figure meant to push him toward this breaking point? When Emily returned later that evening, Lucas couldn't look at her the same way. Every word she spoke seemed loaded with hidden meaning. He wondered how long she had been deceiving him, how many layers of manipulation he had yet to uncover. At dinner, Tyler sensed the tension and grew quiet. The clatter of forks against plates was the only sound in the room. Lucas tried to mask his emotions, but he could feel Emily's eyes on him, studying him. "Everything okay, Lucas?" she asked, breaking the silence. He hesitated, his mind racing with conflicting impulses. Part of him wanted to lay it all out, confront her about Jared, the photos, the surveillance. But another part urged caution. He wasn't ready to reveal his hand. "Yeah," he finally muttered. "Just a lot on my mind." Emily didn't press further, but the air between them remained heavy with unspoken words. Lucas knew he was running out of time. Whatever game they were playing, the final move was approaching fast. That night, the terror resumed. Lucas was awakened by the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost indistinguishable from the creaks of the house, but it was there. He sat up, straining to listen. The whispers grew louder, fragmented phrases echoing in the dark. "You can't hide, it's already too late, watch yourself." Lucas stumbled out of bed and grabbed the crowbar. He moved through the house with the flashlight, his nerves stretched taut. The whispers seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. He checked each room, finding nothing but shadows. Then, in the hallway, he saw it again, the figure. It stood at the end of the corridor, motionless, its face obscured in darkness. Lucas froze, his breath catching in his throat. He tightened his grip on the crowbar and took a step forward. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice hoarse. The figure didn't respond. It tilted its head, as though mocking him. Lucas's fear transformed into rage. He charged forward, swinging the flashlight beam wildly. But when he reached the end of the hallway, there was nothing. The figure had vanished. Lucas's pulse thundered in his ears. He searched every corner of the house, but the figure was gone. Once again, the cameras showed nothing. It was as if the figure existed solely to torment him in the moments he least expected. He collapsed onto the couch, trembling with exhaustion and fury. His phone buzzed, and a new message appeared. "The truth will break you." Lucas threw the phone across the room, the screen cracking against the wall. He buried his face in his hands, teetering on the edge of despair. He couldn't endure this much longer. The truth, whatever it was driving him mad. But he knew he had to face it. The next day, Lucas woke with a plan. He would confront Emily, demand the truth, and put an end to the deception. No more games. No more surveillance. No more shadows in the dark. But as he prepared himself, a new, darker thought crept into his mind. What if Emily was never the real enemy? What if I've been wrong all along? The possibility sent a chill down his spine. He was trapped in a web of lies and illusions, and the only way out was through. He would have to risk everything to find the answers, or lose his mind trying. Lucas paced in his office, his mind in overdrive. The photos of Emily and Jared burned in his thoughts, but he knew there was more to this than an affair. The messages, the hallucinations, the figure, they were all connected to something larger, something orchestrated to push him over the edge. He opened the camera feeds again, hesitating before clicking through each room. The house seemed normal now, eerily quiet and still. No shadows. No figures. For once, the cameras weren't taunting him with their silence. Emily was in the living room, reading a book. Tyler played quietly in his room. Everything appeared peaceful. But peace is an illusion, Lucas thought. He knew better than to trust it. His phone buzzed with another message from the same unknown number. "Don't you want to know how long she's known?" Lucas gritted his teeth. The words struck a nerve. How long had Emily been aware of the surveillance? Had she been manipulating him from the start? Was she the one orchestrating these psychological attacks? He took a deep breath and decided to confront her. He couldn't live in this limbo anymore. The truth had to come out, no matter how much it hurt. Lucas found Emily in the living room, curled up with her book. She glanced up as he entered, her expression neutral but guarded. "Hey," she said softly. "You okay?" He crossed his arms, standing stiffly in the doorway. "We need to talk. Now." Emily closed the book slowly, setting it on the coffee table. "Okay, about what?" "About you. About Jared. About all of this." Lucas gestured vaguely at the walls, at the cameras hidden within them. His voice was strained, teetering between anger and desperation. "How long have you known?" Her brows furrowed in confusion. "Known what?" "Lucas, you're not making sense. Don't play games with me," he snapped, his voice rising. "I've seen the photos, Emily. You and Jared. I've seen the way you sneak around, the phone calls, the notes. I know you've been watching me just like I've been watching you." Emily's eyes widened in shock, and for a moment, he thought he had caught her off guard. But then, something shifted in her expression. She stood up slowly, her gaze hardening. "You've been watching me?" she repeated, her voice low and cold. "Lucas, what the hell are you talking about?" "You know exactly what I'm talking about." He began pacing, running his hands through his hair. "I installed cameras in the house. I've seen everything. I know you've been lying to me." There was a long, tense silence. Emily's face contorted between anger and disbelief. "You installed cameras in our home? Without telling me?" she said, her voice trembling with fury. "You invaded my privacy, our privacy, because you're paranoid about what? Jared?" Lucas froze, caught off guard by her reaction. "Don't try to turn this around on me. I had a reason to be suspicious." "Suspicious of what?" "Jared's been helping me with the company's expansion project." "That's it. Those photos you saw were from work dinners. You've let your paranoia consume you, Lucas. You're acting insane." Emily's words hit harder than he expected. For a moment, doubt crept in. Was he wrong? Had he misinterpreted everything? No. He couldn't believe that. The notes, the figure, they were real. Someone was tormenting him. "I'm not crazy," he muttered. "There's more going on here. Someone is in this house, watching us, leaving messages." "You're telling me you haven't noticed anything strange?" Emily crossed her arms, her anger giving way to something resembling pity. "Lucas, you need help. You've been spiraling for weeks. You barely sleep, you're obsessed with these cameras, and now you're accusing me of things that aren't true. This isn't normal." Lucas's mind reeled. He couldn't trust her words, but a nagging voice inside him whispered that she might be telling the truth. Have I lost control? Have I lost my mind? Suddenly, the lights flickered. Both of them turned to look at the ceiling as the room plunged into darkness for a few seconds before the lights came back on. Lucas's phone buzzed again. He glanced at the screen, dread pooling in his stomach. "Almost time." Emily noticed the change in his expression. "What is it?" she asked, her tone softening slightly. Lucas shook his head. "Nothing," he whispered. He couldn't share this with her. Not yet. He needed more proof, something concrete to explain the madness unraveling around them. "Lucas, please," Emily said, stepping closer. "Talk to me. We can work through this, but you have to let me in." For a fleeting moment, he wanted to believe her. He wanted to collapse into her arms and confess everything, the fear, the paranoia, the figure that haunted his nights. But trust was a luxury he no longer had. "I need some air," he muttered, turning on his heel and walking out the front door. The cold night air stung his face as he stepped outside. He stood on the porch, breathing deeply, trying to clear his head. The shadows of the neighborhood seemed to press in around him. He scanned the empty street, half expecting to see the figure watching from the darkness. But there was nothing. Just the sound of rustling leaves and distant traffic. Lucas's thoughts spiraled. If Emily wasn't behind this, then who was? And what did they want from him? His phone buzzed again. This time, the message read, "It's time to face the truth, Lucas. You already know where to look." Lucas's hands trembled as he read the words. He knew what the message meant. The answer was buried in the surveillance footage, the footage he had spent weeks obsessing over. He had to go back and find it. He had to face whatever truth was waiting for him. Taking a deep breath, Lucas turned and walked back inside. The final act of this nightmare was about to begin. Lucas sat alone in his office, the glow of the monitors casting long shadows on the walls. His mind was a chaotic storm of fear, doubt, and anger. The latest message echoed in his head. "You already know where to look." He didn't know what terrified him more, that someone else was controlling this, or that the truth had been in front of him all along. He scrolled through hours of footage, his eyes burning from exhaustion. He clicked on the camera feeds from weeks ago, meticulously combing through every second. The same unsettling pattern emerged, doors moving slightly, objects shifting when no one was in the room. At first, nothing new caught his attention. But then, at 2:13 a.m. on a feed from 2 weeks ago, Lucas saw it. Emily stood in the hallway outside their bedroom. She wasn't alone. The figure, a tall shadow with an almost human shape, stood beside her. But what horrified Lucas wasn't the presence of the figure itself. It was Emily's expression. She wasn't scared. She wasn't even surprised. She stared directly at the camera, that same faint, knowing smile curving her lips. Slowly, she whispered something inaudible and turned away, vanishing with the figure into the darkness. Lucas recoiled from the screen, his stomach lurching. She knew. She's known all along. The entire time he'd been watching her, she'd been watching him. Playing him like a puppet in some sick game. His paranoia hadn't driven him mad, Emily had orchestrated it, every step designed to make him doubt his sanity. The pieces clicked into place with terrifying clarity. The notes, the strange events, the glitches in the cameras, it was all part of her plan. She wasn't just having an affair. She was dismantling him psychologically, breaking him from within. Lucas slammed his fist on the desk, rage boiling in his veins. He wouldn't be a victim any longer. He stormed out of the office and into the living room, where Emily sat calmly, sipping a glass of wine. She didn't flinch when she saw him. Instead, she set the glass down and folded her hands in her lap, her expression unreadable. "You've been toying with me," Lucas growled, his voice low and dangerous. "You knew about the cameras. You knew everything." Emily tilted her head slightly. "You finally figured it out," she said quietly, almost as if she were proud of him. "Took you long enough." Lucas's fists clenched. "Why? Why would you do this to me?" She stood slowly, her gaze piercing. "Because I needed you to break, Lucas. I needed you to see what you really are. You've spent years trying to control everything, me, our life, this house. You never trusted me. So I gave you what you wanted. I let you watch. And look where it got you." Lucas shook his head, disbelief warring with fury. "You're insane." "Am I?" Emily took a step closer. "Or are you the one who lost your mind trying to control a reality that doesn't exist? You turned our marriage into a surveillance state. You let your paranoia eat you alive. I just gave it a little push." The room felt like it was closing in on him. He staggered back a step, his vision blurring. "So, this was all just a game to you?" "No, Lucas. It was freedom." Emily's voice softened, almost gentle now. "I was trapped for years in this marriage, in your constant need to monitor and control. I needed a way out. And now, here we are." Lucas's mind reeled. "You think you've won? You think I'll just let you walk away from this?" Emily sighed. "It's not about winning, Lucas. It's about survival. You're a broken man. You don't even know who you are anymore. I'm leaving, and you won't stop me." Lucas opened his mouth to respond, but before he could speak, the lights flickered violently. The house plunged into darkness. Both of them froze, their breath caught in their throats. A faint whisper echoed through the room. This is the end. The figure appeared in the doorway, its shadow stretching unnaturally across the floor. Lucas's heart pounded like a drumbeat in his chest. The figure moved closer, its presence suffocating, oppressive. Emily's calm composure faltered, her eyes widening in fear for the first time. What is that?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Lucas didn't answer. He grabbed a nearby lamp and hurled it at the figure, but it passed through the shadow harmlessly. The whispering intensified, overlapping voices merging into a chaotic chorus. The figure stopped inches from them, its form shifting, warping. Lucas felt an overwhelming sense of dread, as though every fear he'd ever buried had come to life. He backed away, his mind teetering on the edge of collapse. "Lucas!" Emily gasped, clutching his arm. "What's happening?" "I don't know," he whispered. I don't." The figure loomed over them, and everything went black. When Lucas opened his eyes, the house was silent. The figure was gone. Emily lay unconscious on the floor beside him. Slowly he sat up, his head pounding. The lights flickered back to life, casting an eerie glow over the room. Emily stirred and groaned, sitting up with a dazed expression. They stared at each other for a long moment, the weight of everything that had happened hanging between them like a shroud. "We need to leave," Lucas said hoarsely. "Now." Emily nodded wordlessly. Together they stumbled out of the house, leaving behind the shadows and whispers that had consumed their lives. But as Lucas crossed the threshold, he glanced back one last time. He had the distinct, chilling feeling that the house wasn't done with them yet. Some truths, he realized, can never be escaped.